Welcome to the Research Hub podcast. I'm Dr. Karlie Intlekofer, and today we're talking about body composition. This is part 2 of my interview with Dr. Nina Crowley. She currently leads clinical education and partnerships at Seika. And so to recap, in episode 1, Nina and I talked about the communication gap between fitness professionals and the members that they serve. A lot of this miscommunication can be remedied by ignoring that urge to default to the same guidance for all. And yes, we all know that there are physical activity recommendations, but getting to know your customers' goals person by person, getting to know their aspirations, this is all really important. It helps us deliver a more personalized experience, and that's what today's consumers want. So Nina, welcome back. And to start out, could you share one of the key strategies that we covered last time?
Sure. Karlie, great to be back. I really enjoyed our conversation and excited to build on that today. So last time we talked a lot about, a lot of behavioral strategies. We talked about the importance of active listening because that opens the door to this sort of member or person-centered focus rather than a method-centered approach that we lay on someone and tell them, kind of that one size fits all. I've got it. I've got a system or a plan or a method. You all follow that. That can miss the opportunity to really tailor the experience to the member. And so it is important then that fitness professionals still provide structure and guidance. Of course, people may say in words, I'm coming to you for a plan, right? And then it's your clinical experience as part of that or your professional experience that you can really work within that, question and structure and what they're asking for to give them what you may know more of what they need. So that careful listening can really expand your role as the members see that you care about really delivering the best experience for them.
Right. And we also touched on, of course, the dangers of making assumptions. I know I shared a personal experience that I had in Irvine, California at a gym there. But if we are making assumptions based on a member's appearance, we're really missing the opportunity to connect. And this can project bias onto those members. And it's always better to ask and listen rather than make an assumption, right? So when it comes to what fitness consumers want, we've all seen this shifting goals, especially since COVID. Yes, we're talking about linking those workouts to mental health. That was a big push that became more popular and more top of mind for fitness consumers in that post-COVID era. But now we're starting to see the addition of some specific goals. Yes, they're thinking about strength, they're thinking about muscle. And as there's more and more research, more social media, more people popularizing this idea that strength is for all, it brings us to today's topic. And that's specifically, how can a facility help their members to see some measurable improvements that are actually going to drive retention? And retention is the name of the game for every organization that wants to stay popular, that wants to stay, top of mind for their consumers, that wants their community to really use the resource optimally. So any initial thoughts on that, Nina?
Yeah, actually, one thing that it brings to mind is kind of in your role, helping fitness professionals translate science into action. I'm actually wondering, from your perspective, when it comes to body composition, what do you think that they're often or most often maybe misunderstanding or overlooking?
Well, some of this comes from just seeing what's on social media, but I think that your average personal trainer and your average fitness consumer, I think that they connect leanness or low percentage body fat to fitness. And what I mean by that is, if I see a picture of someone who's extremely lean and has done, a great job staying active and they look relatively healthy, if you go to the comments, tons of people are congratulating them on their fitness. This is a specific thing, and I don't expect everyone to know the specific description of it, but how is the body using oxygen? Is the body, the heart, the vascular system, the muscular system, how are all these systems working together to use oxygen? When you're really efficient at that, that person is fit. The full term is cardiorespiratory fitness. I don't expect people to use that term, but it really does mean something, and it doesn't mean low percentage body fat. So I see this mixed up all the time. Even myself, again, another personal story. I went to a boot camp class. This was a couple years ago, and I had just recovered from basically like a stomach bug called norovirus. If you've ever had it before,
I
it's very
have.
memorable.
I had it at a conference in Scotland. It was not fun.
It's a tough one. You really can't eat and drink normally, and you can't keep anything down, and so consequently, over that weekend, I'd probably lost about 10 pounds, which we both know is not all body fat, right? A lot of it was water weight. I was really dehydrated, but I wanted to make it to this class. I was like, "I'll be in the back. They won't even notice me." But the instructor called me out and gave me a compliment. Now here I was feeling like death warmed over, but it's again, it's making that assumption that, "Oh, you're looking really lean. You must be doing a lot of runs. You must be more fit." And he's a great guy. I'm not, I'm not criticizing, but it was one of those quick judgments, those quick
Yeah.
interactions that made me go, I feel terrible, worse than ever, low energy, low capacity. But because I'm looking leaner or whatever, more veiny than usual, I get this comment. And so that really makes me think that the fitness industry and all the professionals and all the people who are interested in fitness, we need to really remember that leanness and fitness are not the same thing. So that's one area where I wish I could just like magically make everyone realize that when we make that assumption, it actually can be harmful because I've also personal trained people who were perhaps not the most fit, but they were very lean. And it was actually a challenge for me to get them to think about what their body can do instead of just how it appeared, because of course they looked to themselves, they looked like the body fat percentage they wanted, but they were struggling with daily energy. There were other things they
Yeah.
wanted to do that were more difficult. So that's kind of the thing I think of in terms of misconception. And we know that what we're really circling around is this topic of body composition. What's your tissue quality? What are you made of? But this weight based focus, of course, it's historic, right? It's been the crucial metric for general health. It's the main way most Americans, most people worldwide are kind of thinking about health-based decision making. They're looking at that scale. So I'm wondering how you first became interested in body composition, the importance of tissue quality, because you're an expert in this field and it's part of what your organization produces is tools to measure body composition. So tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, it's funny hearing your story brings me actually to answer that question, which is I worked for a long time in a metabolic and bariatric surgery program at a medical university here in Charleston, where I still live. I was there 18 years. And so working with patients who had weight loss surgery, or leading up to it afterwards, they were my lifetime patients. I had them for a really long time. But in that process, it really did expose me to a lot of kind of the pitfalls of weight only thinking. So I would see patients, I mean, also, as we talked about before, and I know we could riff on a lot, the language and the words we use, right? So, like, even still using the word weight loss surgery, I don't know that that's really the correct term. Weight loss medications, we're trying to move away from that kind of terminology. It's tough to find the right words that are both understandable by the public and the person and correct medically. But I would see patients who had metabolic and bariatric surgery lose weight. If that was the goal, they were highly successful, right? But they might be losing muscle instead of fat. And so at that time, I did not have body composition analysis equipment in my clinic, but I always dreamed of that and being able to really put the things that I'm saying to them about, like, it's not all about weight and we've got to focus on functional health and metabolic health, and you're coming off of all these medications and you're doing all of these things and you're able to go to a gym and able to do some of the things that you've always dreamed of, right? I dreamed of having a way to show them that in an objective way that they could get excited about. So kind of coming to Sika where they do make body composition equipment, it really does help us focus on what we're actually changing in the body with these treatments and regimens and fitness and all of that we're doing. So the body composition can really tell us about that tissue quality that you asked. Are we building strength? Are we preserving muscle? Are we improving function, which are all the things that really matter long term? And these days, we're hearing so much more about this in the media because we do have a class of medications, the GLP-1 receptor agonists, just to begin, in that whole category of either we're calling them, nutrient stimulated hormones or even obesity management medications. But regardless, that class of medications is pushing people to consider a little bit more about the quality of what they're losing, that it's not all weight is the same, that it's not, good to just lose that number. And so to me, that was always is a factor because I'd have people come into my clinic, get on the scale first thing. Of course, that's just how these clinics are set up. And then they'd have probably three different people before they got to me telling them, oh, you look so good. This is great. That number went down. And so by the time I'd get in there and talk to them, they'd already had a lot of positive feedback about just their weight, right? So then I'm digging into sort of the nutrition and the behavioral stuff like, oh, wait, we have a lot of issues going on. Maybe they're not doing so well. But it's hard to separate that once they've already gotten all that feedback of like, you're doing amazing. So for me, that's important in not just in a clinic setting, but really, in whatever setting that the person is going to where they're interacting with other people who are hopefully not giving them too much feedback about their appearance or their weight.
Right. You're speaking to a disconnect between maybe how a person appears just based on that one metric, the scale, and maybe how they're feeling. They may feel depleted. They may feel fatigued. When we lose weight, it's hard. It's very hard. And a lot of people feel kind of almost under the weather if they're losing weight too fast, for example. I took the opportunity to join a podcast that had a person speaking about their experience on these medications, the GLP-1s that you mentioned, and one of the things she said really stuck with me. She was talking about how she'd had all this weight loss, but she was nauseous a lot, which can be a side effect if the medication isn't at the right dose, right? And so when someone asked, why not just ask your doctor to reduce the medication amount? She had concerns about regaining the weight. And yet she had just spoken with us bravely. I mean, I'm so grateful that she was sharing her story, but she had just spoken with us about how she didn't feel good most days of the week, that she was literally developing food aversions where food kind of made her feel nauseous. Like she could only really tolerate certain types of foods, which, by the way, it was ice cream because that was her personal experience. But I just remember thinking, there's something here. There's this disconnect because what she's seeing on the scale is what she thought she wanted as her ultimate measure of success, but without having those additional goals of, I want to feel better than ever. I want to feel energized. I want to have great daily energy and feel strong and powerful. Without those additional components to her long-term goal, here she was reaching success defined by the scale, but not feeling her best. I think that is an area, especially since, like I said, consumers are thinking about mental health, how I feel. I think that's an area that now we're starting to see the consumers really starting to ask for more from these conversations with fitness professionals. So that's really insightful, that disconnect. And I think it's an important point. Most of the fitness professionals out there probably understand the nuances around body composition. There's there's also complications because the terminology is tough. These are new
Right.
terms and they weren't used a lot, except maybe in a clinical setting until a few years ago. So I'm wondering before we get further, if you could clarify, what tissues are included in different measurements or phrases. Like, for example, some of the studies I read are reporting their outcomes in terms of lean body mass. Others are talking about skeletal muscle mass. How do these terms differ? I'm hearing a lot of confusion again through like social media, fitness influencers. How do we define the difference between skeletal muscle mass, lean body mass? What do those terms mean?
Perfect. And just to, add to the last thing you said, I wanted to mention too, we put a lot on the person in front of us. Like this person wanted to lose weight and that was her ultimate goal. I think the ultimate focus on all of that is really coming from our culture. And so our culture putting thinness really above almost all else, that's how it presents. That's how it comes to you. As someone choosing to feel poorly potentially because the ultimate goal is to be thinner or whatever. And so again, highlighting the bias that we have in our culture and really just, how important it is to first become aware of it and then, work against that. And so, yeah. So when it comes to terminology, I do love to talk about this because it is prevalent, again, as we said, in the media these days, finally. It's nuanced and it's hard. So when we talk about body composition methods, it kind of comes back to how are we looking inside your body to be able to put out numbers like muscle mass, fat mass, lean body mass, right? And so some of that comes to, there's a couple ways to look at that. So the one way that we hear the most about is looking at fat mass and fat-free mass. And when we look at those two numbers that add up to your total weight, we may be looking at that from a molecule perspective, right? Like how many molecules in your body are fat cells and how many are other. And when we look at it that way, that is a two compartment model. And that's, where a lot of us are looking at body composition assessment from. When we add the next level to that, where we're looking at maybe the third compartment being bone or bone density, we look at that using a DEXA scan. And that's usually common terminology to most people. That's looking at, the bone density, the fat mass, and then the everything else. So on a DEXA, the everything else is actually called that lean soft tissue or lean body mass. So really, quite technically, lean body mass is everything other than the fat mass, adipose cells, and the bone density, or the bone, the calcium and, minerals that are in bone. And everything else can include stuff like connective tissue and water and skin and all these other things. So when you're looking at a number, lean body mass or lean soft tissue, you're actually looking at a number way higher than what your actual muscle mass is. Okay. And so that number can be, important number to know, appendicular skeleton or appendicular lean soft tissue that's in your arms and legs, taking out the torso, because that's a, tough area where there's also, breast tissue and fluid and abdominal fat and all of that. That's a number that we can look at. But then we like to move further to look at, from that lean soft tissue or lean body mass, how do we get to that actual skeletal muscle mass, which is tissue? So tissue level versus molecule level is where that distinction is made. And the best way to look at your skeletal muscle mass tissue is by a whole body MRI. And so we're not going to be using those in a clinic or in a gym, right? So what we do then is we say in the research lab, we're going to, look at someone's whole body MRI to see what their skeletal muscle mass is. But we've now got technologies that we've developed to be validated to those reference methods. So if you hear, bioimpedance, which is the technology that my company Sika makes, we are validated to MRI for the parameter of skeletal muscle mass. And so what that means is they did a study looking at a bunch of people who had an MRI and a bunch of people who had the same people had bioimpedance done to look at their measure. And the agreement of those two numbers is 97%. So that's sort of that validation component where we now feel pretty confident with 97% accurate to whole body MRI that we can assess your muscle mass in a quick way using the technology of bioimpedance to look at that number. So that's sort of one of the big factors I see. I usually visualize that with the fat-free mass being, so let me zoom out, your total weight minus your fat mass, right? Then we've got fat-free mass. From that, we can get down to maybe lean body mass if you're using a DEXA validated instrument, but hopefully we're using something more like a whole body MRI validated bioimpedance, and then you're looking at that skeletal muscle. And usually skeletal muscle mass is about half of your fat-free mass. So this is something that, we end up talking a lot about when people have different technologies, different companies that they're using bioimpedance devices from, is what are they validated to? That's an important question, because if you're validating to DEXA, you're probably looking at a little bit higher number for that lean body mass number, and they employ some calculations to get to skeletal muscle mass. So I end up having to answer a lot of questions about that, like, hey, why is on that other device over there my number look higher? People love the device that tells them their lean mass or their muscle mass is higher and their fat
Sure.
mass is lower. They assume that's the correct one. Most of the time, that's not the correct one, because that one's making an assumption that some of this water and connective tissue and skin and other stuff is in that muscle mass component. So that's kind of the big piece of that, where we're really looking at the type of validation and what measures we're using to assess body composition. There's other ways to do it. And so you've just got, I would say for anybody who's listening, who's sort of doing this or thinking about doing this in their practice, you just want to be able to know what your device or what your methods are, and how to explain those to folks, because then People do go to other places where they might get their body comp done, and then we don't want to create more confusion by having them say, well, these numbers are wildly different, and so then can I trust any of it? And a lot of that comes into play. I know we've talked about sort of the home device or the scale at home that tells them their body fat percentage or their numbers. They're coming in saying, well, it told me this and I like that number better. And so what's that all about? So again, learning about what that means is really the first step, and then being able to explain that using the right terminology.
I think when it comes to fitness facilities, the advancement of these tools represents a great opportunity. I know when I was younger, I actually tried underwater weighing. I tried DEXA, which these are expensive and invasive and not, or not necessarily invasive, but these are a big deal. Okay. Like a DEXA scanner, I think they're like $250,000. So this is not like facility friendly at all.
Right.
Underwater weighing, who has access to that? I only did because I was at a great health and exercise science program at Colorado State. So, I won't have those opportunities everywhere. And I knew that, but I just like wanted to be the guinea pig for the class and be like, sure, I'll get in my swimsuit and you can dunk me and everyone can see how much I weigh underwater, because I wanted to know. Not everyone wants to know, but there's certainly going to be some consumers today who want a more detailed understanding about how are these gym visits, how are these workouts changing me? And so something that you mentioned that really makes sense to me is that you want to use the same device pre and post. Some devices are better than others. I know I've looked up a lot of data, and some of the old bioimpedance measurement tools were not very accurate, so it really just depends on, are they using the same tool? Are they using it consistently? And then from the fitness professional perspective, can we leverage these tools to reflect to that member, look at the benefit, look at the change. This is moving in the right direction because, as we both know, that scale, man, is it a lagging indicator? It can take forever for the scale to change, even if someone's actually making progress in terms of, let's say, gaining muscle mass or losing body fat. It can hide that progress. And that's what makes it kind of a frustrating metric, which unfortunately, it's what most people have access to.
Right. And I think what you said too, using the same, maybe device before and after, but also, there's different components to that. Like what we're looking for in a device is important because we want to be able to show folks the best data possible in that setting, right? So some of the factors you want to think about, even, some places, some people remember those old, handheld devices, those upper body bioimpedance. We have so many new and better technologies than we did from when we were, in school learning about this or learning about the research validation, that goes along with it. So just looking at top of the body bioimpedance or just the bottom. So if you're on a scale that has nothing to put your hands on, it's going up one foot and around the other with that electrical current, you're not able to look at the whole body. And again, there are some methods that in very lean people, if they're pretty consistent in size, it might be okay. But again, these days we're really trying to get access to more and more people of all body sizes in the fitness setting. So you want to make sure that your methods are also able to, not just from a weight limit, you want a high weight limit so that you're inclusive to everyone, like we talked about, last time. But we also want something that can be valid in the patients of a heavier size so that you can feel confident that the numbers that you're getting are also applicable to their size. So that's another piece of that I think that's important when you're thinking about doing this initially.
Absolutely. And this brings up kind of a challenge for the personal trainers out there. And I have been a personal trainer for several decades. Sometimes you have a client who's really focused on an aesthetic goal. And that, I think that is very valid, but it presents a challenge. Okay. Like, I've had clients who were people who were engaged and were trying to look their best for their wedding day. So they have a specific goal, they have a specific time frame, and they want to fit into that dress. Or, that was just my example. Similarly, you might have someone who wants to look better for another reason, for another event, or for something. I had a client who was competing in figure. That's a very tough category. These are individuals who have to be extremely lean. So these metrics of looking at body fat, looking at if they can improve for, like, let's say, a judge, of course, there are going to be some very valid and reasonable requests for an aesthetic goal. Help me reach this goal. But at the same time, sometimes it can overshadow that quality of life
Mm,
piece. Like, are you moving well? Do you have the physical skills that you want? Do you have the power and strength that you want? And I think more people than ever are getting interested in this strength training, resistance training. I want to feel strong and powerful. They're seeing it on their feeds. They're seeing more gym space devoted to the strength component, right?
mm,
So I think that these tools are really crucial because like I said, they can help a trainer, they can help a facility reflect back to their members there is progress being made. No, you didn't lose weight this month, but it appears that you're gaining muscle or whatever. Like it can reflect still you're on the right track so that people don't get discouraged because as we know, people drop out of gyms pretty regularly. And a big reason for that is not seeing results or not feeling results. So I think these conversations are important because you can draw someone's attention to not only the qualitative, I feel better, I'm less stressed, I'm sleeping better, or
mhm.
even things like I have more pain-free days. That's always been a huge thing on my mind as someone who had chronic lower back pain and who worked with older clientele for a while. I don't want people to be in pain. I want their joints to feel good. So this kind of opens the door to showing that member more detailed information that's personal, right? Personalization is here to stay. And it's also helping with the conversation about maybe the training aspect. What do we change here? What should we adjust here? Etc. When the fitness facility is thinking about these tools and integrating them, I'm wondering if you have any ideas about aligning their messaging with the new metrics that are out here. Because, like as you mentioned, the terms are a little confusing for the average person. So, how can we get that message and that metric to be front and center?
Ooh, this is really interesting for me too, because I think as you've said, my background really being in a clinical patient provider, patient clinician sort of a scenario, I've long have known that it's my responsibility to take what the person is coming to you with, right? Meet them where they're at. But also it's also our responsibility to help correct, conversate around, unrealistic goals. And so I'm saying this because I think it's very interesting in a different setting where it's not a clinician and a patient per se. Like they're coming to you as a personal trainer to improve their whatever goals they are. But it's very interesting because I still see it as the responsibility of the person that in the driver's seat, I guess you would say, or the person being paid to help the person with their goals, is to correct some unrealistic expectations, right? So I will say maybe elite athletes aside, right? And that's for sure not my not my specialty, so I don't even wanna go there, but for your more, I don't know if you have a term for it, like your average, exerciser or person coming to a fitness facility, I do think it's important that, regardless of what they're telling you they're coming for, you're able to correct some of those maybe too aesthetic of goals, right? It's tricky, right? Because 'Cause you're not in a counseling relationship, so you might be able to see, though, like, this person's way too focused on that from a like, am I really gonna help someone who's showing maybe signs of even disordered eating or thinking patterns, help them get to what they've stated their personal goal is when I know that that's not a realistic goal? So, I feel like this is a tricky and really good question because it gets into so many other areas, but I guess from a maybe more general sense of like people coming in and saying, I want to fit into something, I want to look good, I want to meet this short term goal. We first want to not judge that, right? So even though my hairs are up to say just aesthetic goals, or that is not what we want to do. We also want to meet the person where they're at and we want them to come back and engage in regular physical activity. So if we tell them that's a bad goal to have, that's not being a good, practitioner of your craft. So it's sort of taking that and being able to have that conversation like, okay, I think this is a great, reason that brought you in the door. What we know about long-term goals is that having intrinsic related to you and your inside goals, not extrinsic, someone told you to look this way, someone told you to fit in this size, these personal things. If you can find that person's like core values, things that matter to them, is it health? Is it family? Is it whatever these sort of internal goals are for them, if we can connect to their core values, you'll be able to help them meet their sort of more short term immediate, but also keep them connected to the long term. So, really, that like long term behavior change is, I think, what we all need to be reminding ourselves to focus on, even though they might be there for a short term. They might be in your gym for a short period of time. Anything that you can do to help someone view health as a long term pursuit of ever changing goals can really do that person right and set them up for success from the whole picture, the behavioral, mental health, the quality of life, the how do they relate to others, how do they, feel in their skin type stuff. That's maybe a little heavy on the behavioral side, but I do think it's a good point to add in there, just so that we're not pursuing short-term weight loss goals or short-term look goals that are really not going to help the person improve their health long term.
No, I think that that's an important thing to add. There are some detrimental outcomes when people are just absolutely focused on an aesthetic goal to maybe they're not so focused on how they feel, but we want them to understand that as a whole person, goals can be multifaceted. Well, I did have a client related to this several years ago, and he was 20 years old in college, so a pretty stressful, busy lifestyle, but he wasn't working. So I thought, oh, okay, he's got some time to get to the gym and build some muscle. And his goal was to look like a superhero or like a Marvel character, DC Comics, whatever. And so, if any of you guys are aware, you might know that the more recent images of Wolverine, I'm forgetting the actor's name, but the more recent version of that, he's even more ripped and strong and muscular and
Mm,
vascular. I mean, he just, he's playing Wolverine, so he obviously did a training regimen to like really lean out, and so when I was speaking with this client who I'm still in contact with today, that was his goal. And I from, just like how you mentioned, I don't want to come across as judgmental. I want to come across as excited to share with him his passion for this goal. But I did guide him to look at the first Wolverine, which came out in the early 2000s, because I wanted him to see that even Hugh Jackman, yeah, that was his name,
there it is.
Jackman in his original Wolverine, when he got all shredded and ripped up for that role, even he did not rise to the standard that is today. Ives look of muscularity, vascularity, you name it. And so I think even just helping him realize we have a person whose role was to play this character, and this is what was acceptable in 2000 whatever, and it was revamped again in the version that you first saw, just to help him get to the point that that level of vascularity and muscle and whatever, there's nothing wrong aiming for that and working towards that, but it is somewhat unrealistic to think that that's an easy goal to attain. And I think that because his Instagram feed, his TikToks were filled with young men who had achieved incredible muscularity in a short amount of time, he had some ideas that that was going to be kind of an easy thing to reach, which we all know that it's not. It's really not easy. There's also genetics that come into play and hormones that come into play, and not all those people on his feed were maybe natural athletes. So, these were conversations where we refined what he was really after. And he had other things for me, like he wanted to feel lean and fast. Well, that's a very different prescription in my mind to get him to feel lean and fast, to get him to feel like he's got the power and the cardio to really, lean into fitness. So there were other things he said that I could move the ball forward with, but saying you want to look like the most shredded version of Wolverine, I'm like, right on, let's aim for it. But in my head, I was like, okay, we're gonna have some conversation points here where we talk about how realistic is it? How long did it take him to get there? Et
Yeah.
cetera. When we're looking at Wolverine as our inspiration. So I know that
It's a
that's a
tough
very
it's a
specific.
tough place to be. I'm thinking now, right now, as you're talking, I'm like, I'd be the worst if I was in that facility because I'd be like, let's move away and sit on the couch and talk about all your behaviors and psychology of stuff. But I do think it's a reminder that it is very rarely a simple goal, a one dimension type of a situation. And the more if your specialty's in exercise, the more you can learn about behavior, the better you'll be at helping people meet their exercise and fitness goals. Same thing if your specialty's in nutrition, dietitians that I know really gain a lot when they learn about the behavioral skills for that. So I think it also highlights that there's a few people on the team to help people meet their health goals. And that, at least knowing some red flags maybe to look for in what people are saying to know when you're dealing with something that's maybe a little more clinical and requires a referral to someone who can help them in, whether that's disordered eating or something else in the behavioral or psychological space.
Absolutely. And there's so many wins that don't require a specific metric like body composition, even things like being able to lift more than you could before. I like to remind my clients to think of where they were a year ago. So I like them to think of racing their ghost. Are you faster than you were a year ago today?
Mm.
Or other clients, can you do more push-ups today than you could a year ago? Especially if you have a client who's really focused on upper body strength, let's say, which I have a couple. So I think that these kind of like appreciating what your body can do, that
Okay.
message is timeless. When you
And
feel
function. Yeah.
exactly, when you have
Yeah.
more functional capacity, that's like a win. That's like a victory feeling. And we want all of our facility members to feel that way, that they are on track, that they are gaining. And that brings to mind this messaging piece. It's like, I think that old school in the 80s was very loss framed messaging. What I mean is, come and lose 10 pounds in the first month. I mean, I remember reading these ads when I was little, and it was all telling me something about my culture and what was valued by my culture. Lose 10 pounds fast. Oh my gosh, that sounds great. Like this 80s ideal, right? Whereas now, what I really want to see even more of is a gain framed message. Come and gain strength, power, feel better. Feeling like you're more in control of your life is something that oftentimes happens when people start working out more because, you're putting your goal into action. You're seeing yourself go to the facility. You're seeing that and you're viewing that as some level of success. So I want to see more gain based messaging. And I think that especially personal trainers are really well positioned to support that. What skill are you helping them learn? Can you reflect back to your members? Look at where you've come. Now, of course, if you can combine that with body composition tools that have great accuracy, that's like the win-win because now they're not only moving better, but they are also feeling better and you can reflect to them some aspect of their metabolic health based on, whether you're looking at their lean body mass or what have you. So I think that it's an exciting time because all
Mhm.
of this is coming together at the same time and fitness consumers are more aware of these topics. Whereas I know in the 80s, that was not, I was thinking about body fat, but I was not thinking about strength, power, capacity. Can I walk on my hands? Can I do pull-ups? I was not thinking at all like that. I was just trying to keep up with Richard Simmons, to tell you the truth. That was my workout of the 80s, you know?
I
So
d-
I don't know. It's an exciting time for sure.
yeah, well, I think to maybe add on to that, when we're talking about how you feel, it's hard to actually, I'm thinking again, my clinical hat. So sorry to keep defaulting to that. That is my background and experience. But in a clinical setting, you're seeing someone maybe every month, it would be the most frequent, right? Maybe every 3 months, and there maybe some virtual stuff going on in the interim. It is really hard to understand how someone's feeling in that kind of a time frame. So I think one of the really cool benefits you have when you're working with someone more regularly, weekly, couple times a week, is you have a better pulse on how they're feeling. And so you can really ask those feeling questions and see those strength gains in small increments in a way that I don't think they get from a clinical setting. So I think that's a really big piece of that. And looking at the metrics, yes, I think definitely the move away from, I think of the 90s and the low fat era and all of that. We have evolved a lot, but in a way we also haven't. And I still see so much of the diet culture messaging out on social, which is still so damaging to us for all these reasons. But I do think that, moving to sort of strength, function, power is really exciting. And then really the trending over time, that none of these are just like, we want a long-term relationship with you. You're going to be, to really see your best results, you're coming in pretty regularly to see your best results. And so one of the things that Sika's developed recently is this is something I worked on, really closely for the past year, is a visual in our software for you to be able to see trends over time in your fat mass, muscle mass, and fat-free mass. You can also look at your weight, but that's an extra click and it's not the default. So that was really important to me, that it not be weight first. So, but you can look at that based on, it's called treatment tracker, based on the treatment or program or that you're following. So if you're in a fitness setting, you could enter in what the person's doing from a, regimen perspective, and that you're going to be able to follow that alongside the chart where you're seeing what's happening to their mass, or sorry, for their body composition metrics. And so I think this is part of that conversation. Like, we are looking at these metrics. There's going to be some noise around them. I think the graph gives you a really good way to show, oh, hey, it might be up a little bit. We're measuring you monthly or every 3 months or however often you're doing that. But look where you're going from. I like the ghost, sort of idea there, but from a year ago to here. If you hide those in between numbers, you can look at a straight line. The reality is it's doing this, right? But looking how far you've come and kind of talking about that and referring back to a year ago, could you have pictured that this is where you'd be? All of that is part of that good, sort of counseling set of skills that you can use in this setting to help people get, their mindset shifted. And if you can help somebody shift away from that really strong, weight only diet mentality that took years and years and years to develop, I would say you as a uh, practitioner or expert are highly, highly successful.
Absolutely. I think that that's a great point to end on. I want to thank you so much for joining me, Nina. What we're coming into is an era where fitness professionals have even more to consider in guiding members towards their personal health goals. Yes, members are expecting that personalized experience. So, listening to them, meeting them where they are, and having those friendly conversations gives that opportunity to bring up new things they hadn't considered, or new things that maybe they can slightly adjust their lens, expand beyond weight. They can expand to other functional factors. The skills they're gaining, the strength they're gaining, the fitness they're gaining. These are all separate components that, as a fitness professional, you can guide them through. So these friendly conversations are key, and they really help the member view some of the changes that are happening in a better light, because there's a lot of positive changes that don't show up on the scale, and we know that. So I think that it's a very timely conversation, and I just want to thank you so much for joining me. Now, for more science-backed conversations, you can check out other episodes of the Research Hub podcast on the Matrix Fitness Global YouTube channel. We'll see you next time.
Thank you so much.